people say sport compact, what they normally mean is Honda Civic, and for a good reason. Partially due to performance, also due to price, but mostly due to great driving dynamics. The Civic Si has become the cheap, affordable sports car for a new generation of driving enthusiasts. Now for 2012, Honda has unveiled an all-new Civic Si. The thing is with this car, Honda's been criticized a lot lately for getting soft. So if there's a car that can save them, this is it. Now, we've decided to come here to Toronto Motorsports Park, not just to test the new Civic Si, but to test it against the MazdaSpeed3, the current front drive king of the sport compact segment. Joining us today to help out is touring car and time attack driver David Pratt. Now Dave, there's a lot of differences between these cars, even though they are both front-wheel drive sport compacts. The Mazda is obviously turbocharged, direct injection, and Honda went the typical naturally aspirated route. There's a pretty big difference in power here. Can you tell us about it and what it's like out on the track?
The Mazda has 263 horsepower, while the Honda has 201 now, up another 4 horsepower from before, which isn't a big difference. The bigger difference is in torque, where now that they've gone to a 2.4 liter engine, there's 170 foot-pounds of torque. The Mazda, on the other hand, has 280 foot-pounds of torque, so there is a pretty big difference in the way these two cars deliver their power.
And you really feel that out on the track, on the straights, the corners?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in the straightaways, the Mazda is obviously the quicker car. It is quite a bit heavier than the Honda. I believe it's almost, or a little over 400 pounds heavier than the Honda. Nevertheless, it feels much quicker in a straight line. The Honda, though, being naturally aspirated, does pull out of the corners quite strongly, and you do feel the torque difference between this and the earlier models of the Civic.
So the Mazda is obviously the king here in terms of straight line power, but can you talk us through the driving dynamics of each of these two cars?
Yeah, well, the Honda is a fairly typical front drive car. It has a fair bit of understeer in it. I was a little bit disappointed initially about how soft the suspension is. There's a lot of body roll in the corners, but despite that, it grips surprisingly well. It's on an all-season tire, so there isn't a lot of mechanical grip there, but the helical limited slip differential does a great job of putting the power down out of the corners. So even though it feels a little ponderous, and it even porpoises a bit in corners, it actually puts the power down surprisingly well. The Mazda definitely corners quite a bit flatter. It feels stiffer, so it has sort of a sportier feel to it. And on the other hand, though, the brake pedal was almost a wooden feeling to me, where the Honda has a much more natural feeling brake pedal. You can modulate the brakes quite easily. With the Mazda, it was either braking not enough or the ABS was kicking in. So that aspect of the driving sensation wasn't as sporty in the Mazda, but I would say overall the Mazda definitely felt quite a bit sportier as far as how willing it was to turn in, and then how willing it was to really put the power down coming out of corners.
So the Mazda was a bit rough around the edges, both in a good way and a bad way, I guess.
Yeah, the Mazda feels more like a traditional sport compact car. It feels more alive out there. It has some quirkiness to it, but it definitely involves the driver a lot.
Even with all that extra weight.
Yeah, the 400 pounds is noticeable, but it's not on your mind in the middle of a corner where it's cornering nice and flat, where the lighter Honda is leaning over so much. In your mind, it feels like the heavier car, and because it's so softly sprung, it doesn't have that edgy, sporty feeling that some buyers might be used to out of an SI badged Honda.
Absolutely. So it seems like the Mazda is really coming out the winner here. Is that what the lap times told us?
Well, the lap times were actually really interesting. The Civic, despite feeling soft and being less maybe edgy than I hoped it would be, the lap times were surprisingly good. It did a best of 128.5. which is actually a very competitive lap time with other sport compact cars that I've tested at this track. So really, I think despite the sort of squishy feeling that it had out there, it did surprisingly well. The all-season tires, I think, really held it back quite a bit, but the transmission's fantastic. I love the limited slip differential, and the engine makes very good use of the torque that it does have.
And even just the driving feel, you mentioned some of the things. I found personally the pedals for heel towing, they felt better in the Honda than in the Mazda. They were a little closer, and I was, when I got it to one or the other, it wasn't quite as even.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And the Mazda, on the other hand, was the faster of the two around the track by a little over 2 seconds. It did a 1:26.4. And a big part of that can be explained by the long straightaways at this track and the power advantage this car does have.
Yeah, what, 110 foot-pounds, really?
Yeah, that's a huge difference. And this also has summer tires on it, which is going to make a considerable difference in the corners. So really the gap wasn't as big as I initially thought it would be, which says something about the Civic being surprisingly fast despite its soft tuning. But I think the Mazda also has a lot more tuning potential if that's something buyers are interested in doing. Because it's turbocharged, it'll be easy to make a bunch more power with this car if that's something you're likely to do.
So we've really determined that the MazdaSpeed3 is the performance king here. But not a lot of people take their cars to the racetrack, and driving feel really comes into a play for a lot of them. So considering that these cars are also basically the exact same price, Dave, would driving feel play into your decision of which one of these two cars to buy? Would it change your mind from the performance on the track?
Oh, absolutely, it comes into mind. For me, the Honda just feels too soft. I'm accustomed to Civic Si's feeling firm, turning in crisply, and really exciting you with the noise of VTEC engaging and those kinds of things. And this model is just sprung too softly. The tires just don't have enough grip. The engine doesn't make the noises I want it to make. Other than the transmission, which I love, the car just doesn't excite me the way I expect an SI model to. The Mazda, on the other hand, to me is really a driver's car. It makes fantastic power. It feels alive. You feel things through your hands when you're driving it. I'm not a fan of the sort of wooden feel of the brake pedal, but I loved everything else about it. It really feels the way a sport compact car should feel.